Kia ora koutou, and welcome to this webinar today called Perspectives on Afghanistan, hosted by the Helen Clark Foundation. My name is Soraiya Daud, and I work for the foundation. If you haven't already heard from us before, we are a public policy think tank based at AUT University in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. Our aim is to make New Zealand a better place to live, and we do that by doing public policy research into the big issues of the day and proposing solutions to them. We also hold events like this. This webinar has an international focus, but is very close to the heart of New Zealanders. We have always looked outwards, and the interest that people have in Afghanistan is displayed by the high number of registrations we have received for today's event. The crisis which has unfolded there is of deep concern, with estimates that 18 million people are in need of humanitarian support, and there is a very uncertain future as the Taliban has returned to power. Our panellists today all have strong links to Afghanistan and are committed to supporting the Afghan people living in Afghanistan, those that are refugees around the world, and in the diaspora in New Zealand. Firstly, I would like to welcome Abbas Nazari, Zahra Hussaini, and Zakaria Hazaranejad. All three are either former refugees from the Tampa or from Tampa families. This is fitting with this year being the 20th anniversary of the Tampa. A special welcome to Zahra, who is a wonderful late addition to our webinar. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Abbas, Zahra, and Zakaria. Abbas Nazari came to New Zealand with his family as a refugee from Afghanistan and is the author of a recently published memoir titled After the Tampa. He and his family were on the Tampa. Zahra Hussaini is a community advocate from the Hazara Afghan community in Christchurch. Her siblings were on the Tampa. Zakaria Hazaranejad is a former president of the Hazara Afghan Association in New Zealand and is one of the Tampa boys. I would also like to welcome today Helen Clark and Chris Carter. Helen Clark was the Prime Minister of New Zealand from 1999 to 2008 and subsequently served as the United Nations Development Programme Administrator from 2009 to 2017. She has been closely following affairs in Afghanistan since 2001, when her government agreed to accept refugees from the Tampa. Chris Carter is a former long-serving New Zealand Member of Parliament and Cabinet Minister. He led the Regional Governance Programme for the United Nations Development Programme in Afghanistan between 2011 and 2015. Welcome to Helen and Chris. We are pleased to have all five panellists here to share their perspectives. The first part of the webinar will be facilitated by Helen Clark, and the Q&A part of the webinar will be facilitated by me. Before I hand over to Helen, I would like to go through some housekeeping rules and explain how this webinar will work. Firstly, please note that this isn't a normal Zoom call. You can't see or hear us. That doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you. If you look along the bottom of your screen, if you're watching on Zoom, you will see a Q&A function. If you have questions you would like me to ask a panelist, you can put them in there. Please indicate who you would like me to ask it to. That is what I'll be watching when I pick up the questions. Other viewers can like your questions, and those questions will rise to the top. I'll be paying attention to the questions that people have liked. If you have any technical problems with this webinar, like you can't see me or hear me or any of the other panelists, please put that in the chat. My colleague Paul, who is supporting the webinar today, will do his best to help you. Also in the chat, feel free to introduce yourself to other attendees and say where you're watching from. I won't be watching the chat, so please don't put questions in there because I'll be focusing on the Q&A. But I can see that lots of people have already introduced themselves, so it's lovely to see that being used. Yes, just to recap, questions go in the Q&A and technical problems or any conversations with each other go in the chat function. For those that are watching on Facebook, you can put your questions in the comments below and below the live stream, and Paul will transfer them over to Zoom. There just might be a little delay with copying the questions, so just be patient with them popping up, and I'll be looking out for those ones too. Now we've gone over the introductions and the housekeeping, I'd like to hand over to Helen Clark to start the conversation with our panellists.
Thank you, Soraiya, Kia ora, and Salaam alaikum to everyone who's joined today, and a particular shout out to the many Afghan Kiwis who've joined today's webinar. We're all, I think, here in solidarity with you, knowing that most Afghan Kiwis came here as refugees and still have a very close association with family members caught up in the catastrophic developments in Afghanistan of particularly recent weeks. It's just over 2 years since just over 2 decades since the refugees climbed on board the Tampa from a boat sinking in the Indian Ocean. And our 3 Afghan Kiwi speakers today all have an association with that particular dramatic event. And that was the event which triggered my 2-decade-long interest in Afghanistan, which saw us first begin to accept refugees from the country in large numbers. Some small number had already come before. I visited as Prime Minister, I visited as UNDP Administrator, I visited 2.5 years ago to see work with women and children, which was being conducted by World Vision in the west of the country. I guess we can all replay the record of whether what happened after 9/11 was the right thing, the wrong thing, but I don't think we really want to waste time on that today. We want to understand more about the crisis which has unfolded and also look at what the immediate future and medium-term future might hold for Afghanistan. And there's a number of scenarios which could come into play. I suppose what concerns me most is that in global affairs these days, we suffer from the CNN effect, as it's called. At the immediate moment of crisis, like an evacuation from Kabul airport, it's 24/7 television, and then it melts away. And the suffering and the challenges that the Afghan people face don't get the coverage that they should. Let's remind ourselves that the UN estimates that 18 million, yes, 18 million people are at risk of severe hunger. The World Food Programme has said today that they will run out of food supplies in 1 month. This is a humanitarian crisis. It's a human crisis. It's a political crisis. It's a constitutional crisis. It's a crisis on every front. So getting our heads around that and what the immediate prospects for the people of Afghanistan are is one of the key messages we want to convey in the webinar today. So I'd like to bring in first our 3 Afghan Kiwis, just to talk a little bit about how they've greeted and perceived what has happened. I'm then going to bring in Chris, who had an incredible 4 years leading regional governance program in Afghanistan for UNDP, and then we're going to move to look at what are the possible scenarios for Afghanistan, and how can we help? How can we help as New Zealanders, having invested two decades of effort into the relationship with the people of Afghanistan? So, Abbas, author, After the Tampa, available now, wonderful book, where you wrote about your family's experiences and what caused your dad and mum to mobilise the family and come all this way to a new life for you all. How's you and your family greeted the news and how you're reading what's happened?
Thanks, Helen, and thanks for hosting this fantastic webinar, and for all of you, many hundreds who are tuning in whatever platform you are. Speaking to you from Christchurch, New Zealand, where here we are, safe and sound, warm and dry, and waking up with a bit of security and dignity, as we all have, living in a country like New Zealand. The last couple of weeks have been incredibly challenging. My nuclear family, we're all safe and sound here in New Zealand, Wellington, Christchurch, wherever. But extended aunts and uncles and relatives who have left in Afghanistan, who live in Ghazni, Kabul, Mazar-i-Sharif, and other places. The last few months, but especially the last kind of 2 or 3 weeks, with the Taliban advance, has been incredibly challenging for them. Seeing those scenes of folks trying to get onto the tarmac of Kabul airport before it was secured by the military. I personally knew about two people who were trying to get onto that plane. That's before the US military came and secured the tarmac. And then over the next few days, I helped 3 families, just providing them MFAT and DFAT advice from Australia about where to go, where to stand, who to contact. So it was, it was it was a challenging time, and I thought I was doing the right thing. And thankfully, they're now in quarantine in Melbourne. But how different it could have been, because I was forwarding advice from government agencies, and then we had that terrible Islamic State of Khorasan ISK bomb attack, and then I almost felt complicit because I was forwarding on information about where to go and where to stand, and I wondered, had I sent people to that place that day, I could have been culpable. So it's incredibly challenging, and here I am in Christchurch, so I can only imagine what those families, those with valid paperwork, with passports, with visas, who couldn't get onto that last flight out of Kabul yesterday. So something I'm looking forward to discussing today is those scenes from the airport are incredibly distressing, but more importantly, where to go from here. What does the future of Afghanistan look like? Does the Taliban have any legitimacy? Will our government, in 6 to 12 months or whenever, look to recognize them as the official government? So that's what today's discussion was, something I'd really like to focus on. The refugee story, as many of you are very, very familiar with, the Tampa 20 this week, 20 years ago, we were rescued by that container ship. I wrote a book about it if you want to know the details. Makes this moment even more poignant, and makes action from our government in Australia even more symbolic. So hoping that you guys can join us in that. Later on, you'll get a couple of links to petitions and crowdfunding sites that you guys can access and see if you want to sign on. But hoping that with the hundreds that we have today, we can mobilize something pretty powerful. Thank you.
Fantastic, Abbas. Thanks so much. And people are already asking, what's the name of the book and where can we get it? So we'll get that into the links, please. Zahra, calling you in. You came as a 12-year-old girl to New Zealand, and you keep in close touch with the Afghan families at home and here in New Zealand. Tell us how you're feeling about what's happening and what you're hearing.
Kia everyone. Thank you for having me here today. It's a great privilege for me. Well, it's been quite a challenging couple of weeks for us, for our whole community around Aotearoa and around the world, of course. And as Abbas mentioned, I've been helping with quite a few families to see how we can help them, obtain their visas and then get onto the plane and then arrive safely in New Zealand. And yesterday I was just in touch with one of those families that came from Sydney in the morning, and their situation, I've been through the journey from day one that they started applying for the visa until they arrived safely in Aotearoa. It's quite heartbreaking to hear what they went through to get onto the plane, especially because they're from minority ethnic group from Afghanistan. So they're Hazaras, and Hazaras actually had to go through a lot of challenges to be able to actually pass the gate to enter the airport and get onto the planes, because simply because Taliban wouldn't allow them, or the guy was saying his wife was beaten up and the children were crying and there was explosions. So it's been really chaotic, and this is just one example that I've heard from people, and also people who are not feeling safe because they've worked with the army and they've been involved with any foreign forces in the past 20 years, and because the Taliban has access to the biometric device, then they have all the information of the Afghans that have been working with the foreign forces. So I used to get calls. In the last 2 weeks, I've been getting calls in the middle of the night, like 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. in the morning. And I gotta say that the PAs of the minister have been really responsive. Like 4 a.m. they reply to my email. So they've been working really hard to support our communities. And I would love to see what will happen to the woman in Afghanistan as a woman myself, because when there is a war, the most vulnerable member of the society are women who go through a lot of challenges, especially given the history of Taliban and how they have treated the woman in the past and how they've taken their rights. Although they promised and mentioned that they're supportive of women and whatever they do, they can be in the society and work as normal. But are they going to live by their promises? We don't know that because of the uncertainty of the history and what we've seen. They talk to the media, they say we're peaceful and everything, but then in reality we hear otherwise from families that we know in Afghanistan.
Thanks so much, Zahra. And as you say, much unknown. Words are one thing, deeds are another, and we need to judge on deeds, not words. I'm going to bring Zach in now. Zach, known to me from the time I visited the Tampa boys and the Mangere Refugee Reception Centre, and they just arrived and are going through their induction to New Zealand. He's an old friend. So Zach, come in and just tell us how you're seeing things. You've been the president of the Hazara Afghan Association of New Zealand and stay very closely in touch with the community at home and here. Tell us how you're thinking at the moment.
Firstly, thank you. Thank you yourself and the rest of the team, Chris as well. Yes, we've been here for 20 years, as Zahra and Abbas mentioned. We're safe and sound, but we do have worry about our own families that left behind, our communities. And the international community were not expecting, like ourselves as well, that this is going to unfold the way it has, the situation in Afghanistan. People are terrified. In the 90s, when Taliban were controlling Afghanistan, there was only 600 population in Kabul. Right now, it's more than 6 million in Kabul alone. We understand that they have called for amnesty for everybody, but on the other side, we do hear that there are things happening which upsets people. So my main focus will be is where the future is going to go. What are the position of other ethnic groups? What are the position of the Taliban? Whether the international community is going to recognize Taliban as a legitimate government, whether the Taliban is ready to bring other political parties or other ethnic groups into government, whether they're able to form a unity government. We do understand that the situation right now is terrifying. The last 20 years, people has worked hard, especially the Hazara people. I do remember in 2012 when I visited Kabul, like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, when you were driving past Kabul University, people were standing under the light to study, to read their books, to prepare for exams. There were lots of private institutions which was open until 11 o'clock at night. So in the last 20 years, especially the Hazara people have been quite busy with education. We witnessed lots of top students at the national exams were Hazaras. So everybody's terrified, and like yourself and like the rest, I do plead for the government of New Zealand to accept more people from our community. And I do understand that the Labour Party and the New Zealand people have been a good friend to our community, and we have got good relations. So future is uncertain right now. So let's hope for the better. And yeah, I think that's it from me for now.
Many thanks, Zach. So let's bring in Chris, who, as I said, of all of us in recent years has spent the most time in Afghanistan, a pretty solid 4 years based in Kabul and visiting, I think, literally every governor in Afghanistan. Chris, you're going to tell us a little bit about the development challenges that you believe the country's been facing and what now? Off mute, please. Off mute, please. Chris is still on mute while he figures that out. Go to the bottom left corner, Chris, and turn off mute.
Okay,
there you go.
Thank you, Helen. Helen, inspired leadership as always. Thank you very much. Thanks. I should have had my glasses on all the time. Thank you, Helen, and thanks for that introduction. Yes, I spent 4 fascinating years in Afghanistan, 2011 to 2015. I guess going to a war zone wasn't such a big challenge. I had been a parliamentarian for many years, so I just went from the parliamentary press gallery to the insurgency in Afghanistan. But seriously, it was a chance to get to know the country really well. Afghanistan is composed of 34 provinces. I visited in those 4 years, 27 of them. A few were just impossible, but I would have to meet their governors in Kabul. My job and the project I led, which was UNDP's largest subnational governance globally, intervention. It was a 28 million US annual US budget, so it was a big project. Had over 400 national staff and 13 international. And our objective was to increase the governance capacity of each governor's office, plus every province in Afghanistan has an elected provincial council. And we also worked with the 21 largest municipalities. So an incredible opportunity for me personally to get to know the country really well, also to meet many key players, some of them rather challenging individuals. Our Afghan viewers will know people like Gul Aga Sherzai, who was at that time the governor of Nangarhar, or Nur Muhammad Atta, the governor of Balkh, were very controversial figures in Afghanistan who had played quite a violent role during the civil war before the Taliban took over. So those were the people I dealt with regularly. Governors themselves were interested in making their offices work. You know, they had to report to the central government in Kabul, and they wanted more effective financial planning, systems working, IT working. I was responsible for strengthening those things, but I was much more interested, of course, in promoting better governance. That was much more challenging because Afghanistan is a very traditional tribal society. Leadership is seen as very high status, and also, unfortunately, the country under both President Karzai and President Ghani was deeply corrupt. So getting to be governor of a province, mayor of a city, or elected to a provincial council was also an opportunity to make a great deal of money. So it was a challenge for me personally and my team to navigate that innate corruption that was part of the system, but to try and promote better governance. Issues like getting young women into the civil service. It was quite a challenge, and we had great success in Bamiyan and a few other provinces in doing that. Instigated in Herat, a system where we had a progressive young governor who we started a program every week on the local radio station, Meet Your Governor. And people could ring in and ask questions. This was an absolute novelty in Afghanistan and was enormously popular. But his successor, who replaced him 6 months later, wasn't having a bar of being answerable to the people. So those are the challenges. The other thing that was very evident to me as I traveled around the country was the deep poverty of most people who lived outside the urban areas. People are poor in the cities of Afghanistan, but much poorer in the countryside, where Afghanistan is an incredibly dry country. So water is critical for agriculture. So the country, for example, in the last 3 years has experienced 2 profound droughts. So World Food Programme, for instance, speculates that 40% of last year's a crop that has been planted and is about to be harvested has been lost already from the recent drought. So real challenges in the environment and in this harsh, rocky, dry country with a cold winter and hot, dry summers where it never rains. So you can only create food by irrigation. Control of water has been perhaps the greatest source of conflict in Afghan villages for probably millennium. And so it's bred a sense of survival in the countryside, but also people are very, very vulnerable to climatic change, to insecurity. And now with the conflict that's occurred, not sure whether even those basic services that will be able to be provided by the Taliban. These are all challenges facing Afghans in the future. I just want to finish off by saying that, like Abbas, I've been very involved in the chaos of Kabul airport for the last 2 weeks. I had 400 national staff in Afghanistan, and I had many friends in the Afghan community here in New Zealand. And so I too was texting and calling people like you, Abbas, directing them, and some of them I did direct to the Abbey Gate, but luckily they survived where the explosion took place. I hope that we will be able to bring back those Kiwi Afghans who are still in the country who couldn't catch those flights. We think there might be about 250 of them with visas or with New Zealand passports. And I think that it really is on us, New Zealand, to rescue them first, and then to look at how we might take some more Afghans. Canada's taking 20,000 extra, the UK is taking 20,000, and President Biden said that the US will take 50,000. The only people that have said they'll take no one is Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic. Now, I don't want to be in the same camp as Poland, Hungary, or the Czech Republic. So I think it's up to New Zealand to say, right, we're going to bring the Kiwis back, but we should take at-risk Afghans as well, particularly people who've got family connections with New Zealand Afghan families. I think that I want to be seen in the same camp as Canada, but it's just been so generous in saying it will take 20,000. I think we should take 20, maybe 1,000 or even 1,200, but it would be great for our country to send that message out that we care. Tashakor and Dira Manana.
Thanks, Chris, and I think you've got a panel that totally agrees with you on that last point, and thanks for the frank readout on the development challenges. So let's come now to a discussion among us around what the future holds for Afghanistan. Right now, the Afghanistan Taliban have not announced their governing council unless it's happened in the last few minutes. I've been checking each day. There are factions in the Taliban. Of course, we've seen on our news, the sort of soft talkers and savvy social media users from Doha, but we also know there's the hard men with a record around the country, and we're aware of the reports of ongoing targeted assassinations, the folk singer, the comedian, people who from really all walks of life who've offended them in some way or another, already killed, abducted, tortured, terrorized, etc. We think particularly of women, and a number of the questions are coming through on that. Women were dreadfully repressed under the Taliban, and whatever the faults of the last 20 years might be, a lot changed for many women. Women have become legislators, ministers, governors, district administrators. They've become doctors, lawyers, teachers. There's almost nothing that Afghan women haven't been able to do. So many more girls, the opportunity of schooling. So what does the future hold for them? I've seen the Taliban saying on our TV screens, oh yes, there'll be women in government, but not senior. Well, what does this mean? A clerical assistant in a government department. I mean, nothing is clear about this at the moment. Let's also think of the young people. 2/3 of the population of Afghanistan is under the age of 25. Now, the Taliban were driven from power 20 years ago. We have 2/3 of the population who have no memory or recollection of life under the Taliban. Now, as Chris has implied, in the far-flung rural areas and hamlets of Afghanistan, perhaps not so much changed as for the youth in the cities. But the youth in the cities have got their cell phones, their pop music, their blue jeans, they shave their beards. You know, they've been used to a different life. How are they going to react to this? So then we're faced with the immediate humanitarian crisis, as I said, the 18 million people needing assistance, and World Food Programme a month away from running out of food. We're faced with the displacement crisis. Many people have fled their homes because of what was happening. We have, of course, those who have accepted to come to New Zealand, either already here or on their way here. They're going to need a lot of support in our own community for settlement. And we'll have to obviously step up for that. Many more who are eligible, who would like to come. And as Chris said, let's be generous to those others who are very vulnerable and need to find a place of safe haven. But then also let's think of the great bulk of the population, which is almost 40 million, who can't leave and won't leave, and who will need ongoing support. And that's going to mean continuing to support those agencies which have access. It will be World Food Programme, International Organization of Migration, UN High Commission for Refugees, UNICEF. It will mean a World Health Organization. UN Population Fund was able to operate through the last Taliban period. UN Women is doing its best to stay and still has international staff there. There'll be the Red Cross. What will happen to the international NGOs? We don't know. But what we know is the people of Afghanistan need our support right now. On the economy, it was a very foreign aid dependent economy. The IMF has frozen the Taliban's access to the money which would, in the normal course of events, have been available to Afghanistan. So the chances are that the country the coffers are empty. The extent to which China, Russia, Pakistan step up, who knows? There are many actors in this particular drama. There's also the immediate prospect of whether there is ongoing civil war in the country as people fight back, which of course for the people caught in the middle is agony as well. On the governance front, which Chris spoke about, I think they will have a major governance challenge. Many of those who held the senior positions running administration, of course, have been among those who have fled. So there will be, I think, a real challenge to keep running the bare bones of government administration, health system, and then the extent to which the Taliban want an education system. Could it be run? So those are some of the big immediate challenges. We don't know whether they will try to present credentials as a government at the UN in September. That's an issue for the Credentials Committee of the UN, as of course for the Myanmar military junta, which will try the same. For the immediate future, nothing is clear, except that there's huge humanitarian need for the people. And I think it's important, again, that our little country steps up on that as it should step up on the reception of refugees here. So that's just sort of laying out some of the issues, but let's come back around the panel. Abbas, what's your feeling looking forward?
Fantastic. First, I'm just watching those comments flood in about how many people agreed with both Chris's and your point about New Zealand definitely doing more in helping Afghan refugees, as it did 20 odd years ago with the Tampa. Look, the way I see it, and just allow me a couple of minutes, I'll explain. It's two things. First, what's happening over there, and then secondly, what we can do here in New Zealand and by extension Australia as well. My thoughts about what's happening over there on the ground in Afghanistan is this, and Helen, you pointed this out. The Taliban have an incredibly sophisticated, social media savvy, very well-spoken spokespeople who are out there fronting the camera and really presenting a more modernized, moderate Taliban 2.0. They're fluent in half a dozen languages, including English, and they're able to really eloquently put forward their struggle. And that is done precisely so that folks like us in the West can look and say, wow, perhaps they are different. Perhaps this is a Taliban 2.0. Perhaps they've learned the lessons of the 90s. That is done. I mean, we saw that article about one of their spokespeople saying, "I thank the New Zealand government for their generous donation to the Red Cross to help rebuild Afghanistan." That's a media spin right there to say that we're trying to recognize the New Zealand government, so they'll recognize us in return. I think we have to be incredibly careful to not fall for that, because right now the world's media attention is on Kabul and particularly around the airport. But what you have to realize is that beyond that, into the provinces, the Taliban look exactly the way they were in the 90s. I mean, we're already starting to see, door-to-door executions of folks who've worked with the government. We're starting to see, on a softer level, cultural destruction, especially of Hazara, Uzbek, and Tajik cultural monuments. Exactly what we saw ISIS do when they overtook Syria and they destroyed the gates of Palmyra. We're starting to see the same repression and oppression of the Hazara minority. And this is all happening outside Kabul. They wouldn't do it inside Kabul because they know it's a bad look. So while I am forever the optimist that the Taliban will moderate and modernize, I think, as Helen pointed out before, actions speak louder than words. And right now, their actions are definitely not backing up what they're trying to sell us here in the West. The second point there is, what should the international community do? Look, their funds have been frozen. The Afghan economy is in a free fall right now. And what that's going to do is just going to harm the 35 odd million other Afghans who are out on the streets, who won't be able to put food on the plate, who won't be able to shelter their people. I'm seeing a lot of comments coming in about, well, what are other countries doing? Why should we share that burden of responsibility? Well, the fact of the matter is that 95% of the refugee exodus, 95% of them, will just go to the neighboring countries. They'll be taken in by Pakistan, by Iran, Tajikistan, and others. And the very few will be either displaced internally, or that if they're able to and have the means, they might go further afield. And this is where countries like New Zealand and Australia and Canada and others come in and step up and say, we're willing to take a few of you guys. Which brings me to the role of New Zealand and folks like us. What can we do? Well, as Chris pointed out, I understand that the wheels of government in Wellington are turning very, very hard to try and organize something. But the fact that there's been some silence and the fact that we haven't heard something, it gives me as a member of the Afghan New Zealand community a bit of strife to think, okay, well, are they thinking what's happening here? Why have they not made even a verbal commitment? I understand that the logistics are incredibly hard given what's happening there, and there's no secure airfield. But even if some announcements were made, it would put so much more of us at ease. So after this, you might see an email with a petition that is essentially asking two things. One, for an emergency intake of Afghan refugees. And two, there is a Give a Little campaign to try and help those who will be resettled in New Zealand with the basic necessities. So I hope you guys can join me in that. Those resettlement days, arriving to New Zealand in a foreign country, they're pretty hard. You literally have the clothes on your back because you're rushed to get out of the country. So donating to the Red Cross, both monetary and personal goods, it's incredibly appreciated. And I'll pass it on.
Thanks, Abbas. Very, very, very practical points about the support that will be needed here. And this is a big intake coming all at one time. So all the agencies that work with and for refugees and all the community support organizations here, including within the Afghan community, will be needing a lot of help to get this right and give the Kiwi welcome we would like to see people coming to our country get. Zahra, please come in again, looking ahead, what you think is going to happen, what you'd like to see.
Well, it's really hard to predict what the Taliban is going to do, especially with women, because when I read the reports and also hear stories from people in the community who are connected to their families, and also my own family members who are in Afghanistan currently, hearing about their fear of how, what's going to happen to their woman is quite concerning, because just like Abbas mentioned, all Taliban is speaking to the media because they know the world is watching. And when you look at the provinces that are around Kabul or outside in, rural areas, you hear otherwise, like family members fleeing their hometown, and then they keep moving around because the Taliban is going door to door, literally asking for them and saying, where's this person? We need to get them. Like one example is my own cousin. 8 of his Hazara friends were taken. No one knows what happened to them, and they're chasing him as well. But he has to change location every single night. And he moved from Herat to another city with his family, because he said, if I leave my family behind, especially the women who are very vulnerable, they're going to be taken by the Taliban, or they're going to do something. And I hear from women in here that their family members who only have a widow and 3 young girls, they're all worried about, the Taliban forcing their daughters to get married to them, like, as young as 8, 10, because they've done that in the past. And, they're saying, we're following the Sharia law, and nobody knows what's going to happen. So, and especially when I saw them, the minister of education mentioned that there should be separation at universities and institutions in Afghanistan, so that we have men or girls and guys separate. But this is going to put more pressure on women, because if there is a class with majority of guys and a few women, then it's gonna, what are the chances of them being able to access same gender lecturers or teachers? And it's obvious and clear that what they're trying to do is keep women inside, and especially now they're saying that we don't have our boys or our guys are not trained to treat women or in a nice way, so they have to stay at home at the moment. I've been watching clips of YouTubers that are staying at home. They can't go out and do their normal stuff, and how they're used to in the past 20 years, staying at home locked up and worried about going outside. And I know people who have been vocally activists against Taliban, women who are lecturers, who can't continue doing their work, and they get threat notes and emails and letters sending to them that if they continue what they're doing, they're going to be killed. And so they have to hide. And they even I hear from people that they have to burn their IDs if they've been involved in the army, burn everything so that they don't have any evidence. So when we were communicating with the immigration, one of the questions people asked was, how do we provide the required documents to prove that we're in danger, because they have to burn everything, because Taliban is going door to door, and some people had to run away and just leave their hometown as soon as Taliban took over their country. So and I don't know what will happen to women, but my ask from the government is to, just like Abbas mentioned, to look out for those vulnerable people in the society in Afghanistan, because they're the ones who are at most risk. And I think New Zealand has a moral obligation to do its part, especially being at the forefront of usually leading in every humanitarian aspect.
Thank you, Zahra. Look, we just got the most amazing comments coming through and questions, and we promised we'd ask some questions. So I'm going to ask Soraiya now. Soraiya, can you direct a question to Zach? We want to sort of stay oriented to the future now. So one of those questions would be great, and then one to Chris, and then we'll come back round Abbas and Zahra as well. So please pick those questions now. Soraiya, off mute, please.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the reminder, Helen. So that was a very sobering conversation, and there are lots of questions to go through. So I've been noting down sort of some general themes as well to try and kind of pick up what we're going to be asking. The first one to Chris.
Can you go to Zach first, please?
Oh yeah, I'll go to Zach first. So Zach, I'm just trying to think about a question that would be good for you. What do you know much about the impact of COVID-19 on the people that you in Afghanistan, from the people that you're connected to? How is that impacting additionally to the crisis that's going on at the moment?
In my opinion, COVID is not even talked about right now in Afghanistan, especially in Kabul. People don't even believe COVID existed because of all the problems that's going around right now. They scare the fear that they have right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I looked at the last 20 years, people who worked so hard privately, getting education. We've been seeing women having a candle in their hand, going to national exams. We've seen women who are breastfeeding their babies and sitting a national exam. We see so many young girls and young boys getting education. So that was the main focus in the last 20 years. There were lots of poverty as well, but mainly in Kabul, that's what it was happening. Suddenly, everything unfolded. Taliban came and took power, so nobody expected the rapid of them coming into Kabul and taking over the capital. I mean, President Ghani has been betrayed the international community and its own people. So right now, the Taliban is saying that we're going to give amnesty to everybody. But on the other hand, as these two young girls and boys mentioned, we hear different news. But what I was very hopeful that the Northern Alliance, the Tajiks, Pashtun, Hazaras, and the Uzbeks will come to a term with the Taliban to form unity government. Like 2 hours ago, 1.5 hours ago, I got a message that national resistance has been called by the Northern Alliance, especially by Ahmad Shah Massoud's son. So this is going to happen very soon. That means that they haven't agreed into a coalition government. And we have to understand that one ethnicity group cannot govern alone. There are factors that they need to look into it. So if this civil war starts, it's going to be a chaos. And 6 million plus population in Kabul and the rest of the cities, people will raise up. We will see door-to-door fighting. This is very disappointing. And as Abbas and Zahra mentioned, that international community has to do something. I watched the news that Minister of Home Affairs in Australia said that they have airlifted 4,100 people. How many New Zealand has picked? I think the government, like Chris mentioned, we have to come forward and give our support. The information that I get, it's going to be bad. It's going to be dark. It's going to affect everybody. It's going to affect the international community. Unfortunately, the neighboring country has closed their borders. They're not issuing visas for people to leave the country. Everybody's terrified. I mean, if you look at the rush at the Kabul airport, people genuinely wanted to get out. That was the only exit pass for them. They have been gassed, they have been shot on people who are going through the airport. So unfortunately, it was a chaos. And so many people left behind. We have got families who are left behind. They're terrified. They hear rumors.
So for those people left behind, what can the New Zealand government do to open up a quota for refugees, Chris?
Let's bring
in addition
Chris
to sort of what the options are at the moment.
Because Chris has been doing an amazing job working and advocating around this. Come in, Chris.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Yes, we aren't sure exactly how many are left. There's a thought it could be around 250. At the moment, I think the government are waiting to see whether the agreement between the offer that Qatar and Turkey have made to the Taliban government regime that they would help them open Kabul airport again to commercial flights. will be an opportunity if the Taliban keep their promise that people with passports or valid visas will get out. But as that group that Helen referenced before, the at-risk group, and we have given visas in the last few weeks to people like women judges and so on, women prosecutors, they will have a lot of difficulty getting through the Taliban authorities at the airport. I would think that they would be very much at risk. So we have to hope that Abbas mentioned right at the beginning of his presentation that a potential green zone could be set up at the airport where there would be more international presence for people to come out. If that happens, that might make it a bit safer. Or we might just have to look at getting people through the Pakistani or Iranian borders and then flying them to Dubai and getting them home. So it's a real challenge. The government, I think, are in the process of deliberating, waiting to see what happens early next week over once the Taliban have announced their government, and to see whether that airport opens or not. But it will be enormously difficult at the moment getting people out. And can I just share quickly one story I heard last night, which really encapsulated for me the challenge and fear that people have in Kabul at the moment. A young UN staff member, national staff member, went to the UN compound, which Helen and I know well, on the Jalalabad Road in Kabul, to try and get his passport because the UN had taken all their passports. And he took his 2 preschoolers with him. He couldn't get the passport, and he was leaving the UN compound, and he was stopped by 2 Pashtun-speaking Taliban guards from southern Afghanistan. They couldn't read. So when he showed the document, he was a UN staffer. They said he was a kafir, that he was working with the foreigners, that he had sold himself and he'd changed his religion. They beat him up, they stabbed him, and he sent a photograph of his stab wound. It wasn't fatal, but he said if his 2 preschoolers in the car hadn't started screaming so much, he was sure that these 2 Taliban boys would have killed him. And that's the reality on the streets, and that's in Kabul, where they're on their best behavior, and they had no concept of the difference between the UN, NATO, or whatever. He'd worked with foreigners. He was, in their view, a traitor, and they were bent on killing him. That's the reality of that. Was last night in Kabul.
So given that challenge of humanitarian organisations and that working in Afghanistan at the moment, what options are there to deal with things like the current hunger crisis?
So I think the obvious short-term actions are support for the range of humanitarian organisations which can access the country. And I've posted about them. And by the way, I've suggested in our chat that when the Helen Clark Foundation mails out to everyone who's registered for the webinar, we need to put in there some suggestions for actions that individuals can take and the kinds of organisations that could be supported both here in New Zealand and internationally. Look, World Food Programme is there. It's going to run out of food in a month. So clearly governments like New Zealand, governments around the world need to step up to support it. Same will go for the High Commission for Refugees and UNICEF and the others. So that I think in the short term, humanitarian assistance is critical, and getting our house in order here to give a Kiwi welcome to those on their way already here, and then that special allocation of places outside the quota for the remaining Kiwi associated and families, and then playing our part in supporting those who are at risk because they were women judges, rights advocates. There's a wide list of exposed and vulnerable people. What Chris spelled out is of course the reality. You have the soft talkers from Doha who are social media savvy, as Abbas referred to before, and you've got the thugs on the street. And the thugs on the street, of course, have a chain of command as well. I get very irritated, I must say, when I watch some television channels with the very, very soft interviews given to Taliban spokesperson. It's as if these journalists are worried they'll lose access if they ask hard questions. So they ask soft questions and never put it to them. What about this killing? What about that killing? What about these reports? So, please watch everything with a lot of skepticism. I think fantastic journalists like Lise Doucette, who knows Afghanistan well, have done a great job on BBC, but I can't say the same for every journalist. Soraiya.
Thank you very much. The final question is really about, comes back to the question about refugee quotas as well, and in terms of, what can New Zealanders do to try and influence the government to create that sort of extra category? I think that's what a lot of people in the question answer quite interested.
Roslyn Noonan, our former Chief Human Rights Commissioner, had a very good suggestion in the chat. She said, everybody get onto your Member of Parliament. I mean, that's the thing.
So there is some on the chat as well, so that's good that they're here.
And we've got, I see Ingrid Leary on the chat there. Kia ora, Ingrid, but there's others too. Get on your talk back. Those of you who can write an op-ed, a blog, a Facebook page, it's got to be community action. Rachel Boyack from Nelson is on. I know she's very in touch with Afghan Kiwis in her own community. So this is the point. Raise your voice. Afghanistan needs our help now.
That's fantastic, Helen. And I'll just echo that the MPs, they'll move once they see that, wow, there's a groundswell of support from mainstream New Zealand for this. And the fact that there hasn't been anything, I think might light a flame there. Another way that you can help is also, look, the resettlement of Afghans to New Zealand, it's going to be in the hundreds. And those folks are going to need help. I know the Red Cross is making an appeal for both monetary and physical goods. So please just look at that, Red Cross New Zealand. And also, I've been getting so many messages that I've got a spare room, that I'd love to host some Afghan refugees and all the rest of it. Those details will come out shortly. I would love to see the New Zealand government look at non-traditional ways of, just putting them into mangere and then setting them out to state housing. So look out for that refugee quota branch at the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. They'll be the ones who do the press release and send out guidelines on that. So that's your go-to. But first and foremost, I think, look, the key point is for the New Zealand government to say, we understand it's incredibly challenging and we will try and get all our people out, and we will do an emergency intake of Afghan refugees as the previous administration did. I'm just trying to try to understand why they've been so incredibly silent on this. But I think with support of the many hundreds who are watching today, just a simple email to your local MP, I think will get them moving.
Thank you so much. It's been an honour for the Helen Clark Foundation to provide this platform for the community. Thank you again to Zahra, Abbas, Zakaria, Helen and Chris. Thank you to the members of the Helen Clark Foundation. Your support allows us to host events like this, and this webinar was opened to the general public because of the public interest in the issue. Thank you to all the non-members who joined us today. There were over 600 people on this webinar today from around the world. And that was really special for us and great to get some New Zealand voices out there on this issue, especially Kiwi Afghan voices as well. So the Helen Clark Foundation welcomes any new members. Please sign up if you'd like to be the first to know about events like this today. We run webinars quite frequently, especially kind of in this new environment that we're in. I'd also like to recommend that people check out Abbas's book After the Tampa, available in any good bookstore next year and just near you, and just keep engaging in this issue. I think you've heard a lot today about places that you can go to engage in this issue, things that you can do, so some practical steps about engaging with your local politicians, contributing to the humanitarian effort. And the thing that I would pay attention to most is that there are a lot of people from Afghanistan in New Zealand that are very connected to their families and communities in Afghanistan, and as refugees around the world as well. And so make sure you reach out to our fellow kind of Afghan refugees in this time, former refugees in New Zealand, and also people that are connected to the Afghan community, because I know that they would really appreciate your support and care at this time. And thank you for attending our webinar. I've just got one last thing from Helen. Yeah,
one last thing from me. If you're really enjoying sort of getting these kinds of insights. Tomorrow, UN Women New Zealand has a panel, and
Okay,
it will
great.
have on that panel a number of Kiwi Afghan women. So go to their social media site, on Instagram, Facebook, the rest of it, and join in. I think it's the same time. Look, you know, we've got our COVID battle going on, but the battle of the people of Afghanistan is far bigger than anything we face. So let's, you know, keep them in our minds and do what we can to make a difference. Sobering that Zach said, you know, probably COVID's the last thing on people's minds at the moment, and yet there is a serious pandemic there. Thanks,
true.
everybody. Fantastic.
So thank you very much for attending our webinar today. Have a safe day in your bubbles, and we are particularly thinking of our communities in Tamaki Makaurau who remain in alert level 4, and also people in Chris's Rohi out west as well. I know that they'll be they're, you know, undergoing a lot of stress as well with the recent flooding. So thank you very much for being here, and you know, go well.